Good morning, a good day, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from all corners of the world. My name is Bongiwe Tutu from the Africa-China Reporting Project in Johannesburg, South Africa. I greet you all and thank you for joining us for this webinar on how to protect yourself and your data. It is a great honor to have you all, and we trust that this webinar will be highly beneficial, providing you with tips and tools on how to secure your digital footprints. Last year, within the same theme, the Africa-China Reporting Project held a journalists' workshop and an open forum on digital identity, data, technology, and privacy in Africa. And so we are very pleased to be able to continue expanding key voices on digital identity and data privacy. This is the third of 10 webinars which are spread throughout the course of this year. So please keep up with our website and our social platforms to participate in our upcoming sessions. Before I hand over to our panelists, I just want to note to you that if you have any questions or comments to this session, you can share them under the chat and Q&A sections here on Zoom. We're also live on Facebook, where you can engage with us at WITS China Africa Reporting Project. You can also tweet us your questions and comments at WITS China Africa. I now hand over to our panelist, Desmond Latham, COO of Frayintermedia, Africa's flagship media organization. Desmond will be providing us with the essentials of protecting our digital identity and data within the scope of Africa-China relations and widely. Desmond, thank you and welcome. Over to you.
Thanks, Bongiwe, and welcome to our attendees coming on board rapidly. I've received a spreadsheet list of the kind of questions and things that people are concerned about, so thank you for taking time to fill
Desmond,
that out.
I can't hear you. Just try to switch your audio on.
Yeah, it is on. 111, can you hear me?
Still nothing.
Oh, that's strange. I've done a test. The system is showing action. Can everyone else hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now we're in the same boat. That's excellent. So thank you. Thank you for that list of questions that some of you put through. There's quite a list of people. Some of you are using VPNs already and others are battling with your passwords. So we're going to take a broad sweep across protecting data. And as you're going to hear from how the presentation works, there's freedom in information, but there's also responsibility in information. And in our world today, one of the problems that we have with the internet in particular is, unlike with mobile phones, one of these things is you are sitting with a computer that or a system that you're using that is not unique to yourself. It has what's called IP addressing. And IP addressing can be spoofed because there's not a single number. It's very difficult to do that with a mobile phone because this phone I'm holding in front of you here has the only number in the world that exists is inside the SIM card. Whereas with computers, you don't have individual numbers. And it's like that in a nutshell because of freedom. When the internet began 30 years ago now and accelerated, the idea was to keep it open. So we would share what's known as IP addresses. That has created quite a problem when it comes to the modern world because people are abusing the rights of freedoms. So I'm going to share my screen with you and we're going to go through the presentation. I do this quite quickly. So there's a lot to go through and it's actually a vast area, as you all know by now. So you will get a copy of the presentation at some point. And if there's anything that you need to know immediately, obviously we have a question time at the end. Please feel free to ask questions. I'm going to address some of the questions that came up on the spreadsheet that I saw as I go through this. But there will also be, there's quite a lot of technical stuff in here. So if you're not very technically minded, don't be freaked out by it. There's something called YouTube, which will show you when I'm finished. And also, if you go search DuckDuckGo or Google, you'll find some of what I'm talking about and you can apply it. But it's really important that we get to some of the specifics that I have here so that when you in your professional life or your life as an individual want to make changes to secure yourself for whatever reason, as journalists particularly, then you will be able to understand why it's important rather than saying, okay, I know exactly how to set up a VPN now. You're not going to be able to do that in the time that we have if you don't know how to do that yet, but you're going to see how to do it. and I'm going to give you some advice about it. So with that said, the whole thing begins with a threat event, a risk assessment. So everyone laughs at this because they say, you know, I'm just Joe Soap. No one really knows who I am. But the big problem with that thinking is that because the world of connectivity has increased to such an extent, people are now committing crimes across the world for a handful of dollars and converting to Bitcoin, for example. So you may think at first glance that there's not much money in your bank, so why am I being noticed? Or I'm not dealing with oppressive regimes, so I'm just a known entity. So I'm going to take the chance of being anonymous. That has changed over the last 5 years in particular. Hackers are targeting kind of more and more individuals for specific reasons. And then secondly, in relationships, people are realizing that they can abuse digital if your relationship goes south. So you have these two trajectories of abuse patterns. Then the third is nation state. There's been a massive acceleration of nation state abuse of the freedom of the internet. And this is across the world. I'm going to show you some examples of these, particularly in Africa. And I know many of you will be aware of these, but when I list them, you'll see that this is an intrinsic, fast-moving area. I'm a member of a group called the Hacker Consortium, and we exchange information. I got a warning this morning about a new virus that's emanating from China, actually, believe it or not, and it's attacking Word, and particularly in Japan. So as we sit here, things are happening in the back room, and it's nothing to be afraid of, but you must be aware of it. And also, once you're aware of it, you need to take action. So your risk assessment, it's a compilation of risks associated with potential threats. So as I said, you sit there and say, what's the threat? Well, the threat these days is phishing. Someone coming after us for our email details of banking. And I'm going to go through one now that I've been receiving a lot of these, as we all have, in the last week or two. And the last month, COVID-related phishing has accelerated phenomenally. I mean, about 80% of the world's phishing now, hackers are trying to get you information about bank details in particular. They're using techniques linked to COVID-19, and which is kind of evil, but it's also happening. So you need to be fully aware of what the implication is. What we're speaking about here is it changes. Things that I'm referring to change constantly. But the overarching thing is, on a risk assessment, is how am I exposed to confidentiality, integrity, and other system theft from me? And what does it mean for me? So obviously, if you're dealing with government-based things or you have a big company, you are aware of this. If you are looking at changing your journalistic career into investigative journalism, this is where risk assessment is going to go through the roof, because you've gone from doing lifestyle journalism perhaps, and now you're going to be doing an expose into a famous car company, and they're going to come looking for you. This is just how it works in the modern day. They're going to try and find your social media. They're going to try and find weaknesses in you. So if you peruse porn, or if you go and you like to go to strip clubs, they're going to find that out about you, and quite quickly too. So the thing about risk assessment is we have to realize that our actions are analyzed on a real-time basis. It's not last week, it's now. So you can't say, oh, well, I dealt with this last year, this time. You're constantly dealing with this if you're in the world of media in particular, because these things are changing. So as individuals, we have low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And I won't go through all of those, but the bottom line here is that you've got to sit back and think to yourself, okay, what am I exposed to? I use social media, for example. Do I have two-factor authentication? And as I said at the start, before we started here, I was chatting to Bongi and others. You have to install two-factor authentication in your social media. If you haven't done that, when we're done here at the end of this hour, go and do it immediately. It takes a few seconds to set up. Yes, when you go and log in on a new browser to your Twitter account, you're going to get a note that says to you, put in your password, and we're going to send you an SMS to your phone. And then the SMS protects you against someone who can just somehow hack your system. And in the end, it's quite hard to get around that, as we'll see. It's same with banking systems. Banking systems automatically use two-factor authentication now on the apps for a reason. So we as individuals have to do that. The impact of the risk, if you see loss of confidentiality, integrity, those are the two big things for us. That's a problem. As just individuals, as journalists, it's even more important, especially the integrity part. If you're going to be going to do investigative pieces on on nation states and oppressive regimes, then you better have your house in order. And if it's not in order, you better get it in order, because the nation state is going to come looking in your backyard. So that's integrity. You can't go telling people how important it is to be ethical, and then you're unethical in your own life, bypassing tax, for example, or anything, domestic violence, etc. The loss of availability is really for systems, bigger systems such as banks and so on. So the surveillance threats that that we have identified are, first of all, that are growing is face recognition. And face recognition in Africa is becoming a big issue. There's a number of reasons why we need to mention this. The one is that American, Israeli, Australian, and Chinese companies have been perfecting the ability to read African faces as separate from other faces. And in fact, they've been doing test runs in different countries in Africa to perfect this. In the US, this has led to a big problem, and I'll explain in a minute what happened to a retail chain there who were discovered to have been using 200 face recognition cameras in predominantly minority areas. You can see what kind of human rights and civil rights problems emerge from this. So there's a list of companies involved in this, and if you spend some time and you go and research, you'll see. What I'm telling you about here is not speculation. It's not allegation. We're going to get to allegation a little while, but what I'm telling you about AI and face recognition is it's not allegation, it's happening. But the big problem for people doing face recognition is the computer power required to read faces. So right now, it's a bit of a myth. It's a bit, we've heard governments saying, we'll target you in Hong Kong and we'll identify you and so on. Well, in a very small area like that, yes, it's possible to identify many faces, but it's much more difficult on a 6 billion people scale to identify 6 billion faces. There's just not enough computer power at the moment. And don't worry, if people tell you there is, they're lying, okay? But next year, this time, it may be different. So face recognition is a bit of a twitchy area at the moment because people are being misidentified left, right, and center. And there's a problem with face recognition on the computer and algorithm side. But companies like DeepCam, which is an American company, it's called DeepCam LLC. It's been involved with supposedly doing human rights monitoring, and DeepCam and Rite Aid. Rite Aid is a retail chain in the US. The company set up face recognition systems last year, or in the last 2 years, in more than 200 stores. And most of these stores predominantly were in minority areas. They were found out, by the way. Reuters did an investigation, which was published only, I think, less than a month ago about this. And Rite Aid, the retail chain, has now removed, or said they've removed the cameras and no longer doing it. So they know what they're doing is not correct. So we need to understand that the people doing this deep down, there's an understanding that the integrity, remember the word integrity in the risk assessment, that their own integrity is suffering because they're doing this. So they know there's something wrong about this. They're saying, yes, it's to stop attrition. Attrition in retail is people shoplifting. So it's to stop attrition and to identify people who may be involved in attrition. And then the defenders of human rights would say, why don't you just arrest them, coming out the shop? Why do you have to monitor them? And are you trying to double guess what their future is? So this is what Shenzhen Shanmu is doing, for example. It is working to identify risk going forward for the involved in China. So the example there is that if they suspect that people are involved in nefarious activities, there's a credit rating system that is being employed and is being tested in Shanghai, for example, and in a couple of other cities. And what happens is if your credit rating dips because you start getting involved in nefarious activities, you can't get a passport. That's one of the trade-offs about the credit system. You can't get bank loans. You're monitored more closely by the state. Then there's a tie-up in nation states, Israel, America, China, Russia. They're all involved in funding because this is a weaponized process. Information is weaponized and identity is weaponized. So nation states are naturally going to want to do that. And then, of course, you have the secondary states from there. If you like to think from post-Cold War, is states around the world, emerging nations, developing nations in particular, who are tying themselves to those countries. And they're tying themselves to that kind of surveillance methodology. And I'll show you examples of that now as we go through. So there's AI, that is people are speaking about, artificial intelligence. It's supposed to assess the risk, and I've just mentioned that. There's drone tech. In the last month, I've been following DJI. I have a DJI Mavic drone that I use to film. And DJI's update for the Go 4 Android app has a back door for the Chinese government, which Snacktiv and Grim is one of the most powerful anti-hacking networks of people like us or code writers who are identifying threats based on algorithms, not on what nation states say or not on what experts say, but based on the fact that they can prove that there's a problem. So, for example, DJI's latest Android app update collects permissions such as data and AMSA and AMIA, which is the serial number in your SIM card, for example. And then it uses anti-debug and encryption hardware. So you can't actually encrypt the application after you download it, and you can't encrypt your own machine. So on the one side, the nation state says, well, that's good. It stops people from being criminals. On the other side, people say that's bad because you may use it nefariously to oppress me. So you can see that tension growing between technology that looks fine. I mean, East Africa's got a fantastic drone and development process going. I mean, Rwanda, Kenya in particular, and even Uganda is getting involved. So there's been a growth of the use of drones. 90% of the world's drones are produced by DJI, which is a company based in China. And by law, the Chinese demand that the server that runs DJI is accessible by government, which is not the same in Germany, for example, or even the USA. So you can see that there's a tension growing between what looks righteous to protect the nation state and what looks dangerous, which could be abused, by people. So here is the update on Android. It was tested, and what it does, it accesses your contacts, microphone, camera, location, storage, battery life, network connectivity, images, video, applications loaded on phone, and then it switches the phone encryption off so that what Mavic software there is doing, they've denied it, by the way, but we know it's happening. So you've got to take this, you've got to understand there's a lot of allegations that float around, and you've got to understand the reasoning to do that. It's called Hong Kong in Mavic's case, because a lot of the protesters have been using drones, and the government wants to control the use of drones in Hong Kong for obvious reasons. And this is a recent update, by the way. This is in the last month that this has happened. So these things are starting to press in on us. So linked to the fact that we do know that AI and various other technologies are going to be used by nation states in particular and bad people generally to abuse us. What do we do about it? The first thing I noticed from the list of questions I got and notices was passwords. And it concerned me quite a bit because a lot of the people on this call are journalists, and we have to understand about a few things about passwords. The first thing, yes, best practice is you change it regularly, but worst practice is that you use a bad technique. So you can change it as many times as possible, but if you've got a bad technique for setting up a password, you may as well just stop wasting your time. So the ideal option here is to use other automatic password generators, which people will tell you are safe. They're not that safe because it's a spreadsheet of data somewhere, and if someone hacks that spreadsheet, they've got your password. The second way is what I'm showing you on the screen here, which is you use a phrase. And here in Africa, I know on this call are people from around Africa. You know, one of the fortunate things for us, I speak 4 languages, and you out there speak at least 4, and probably 5 or 6 or more, is you can use multilingual languages in a phrase to set up your passwords. So it's not a name, it's a phrase. So an example of a phrase I've got there is Granny loves purple. Then you convert the letters to numbers. So the A turns to a 4, and the E becomes a 3, and the O becomes a 0. Okay, so you can use this, extrapolate. You can go mad on this. God is great, but don't use that because everyone else is doing it. You know, use this something that's very personal, that you even think as a phrase in multiple languages, which is even more important. Some of my passwords of this type are in isiZulu and English combined. Now, who's going to hack that? Unless they actually find they do what's called a brute force attack, which means that they steal my password. Who is actually going to try and think what algorithm is going to figure that out? I can promise you it'll take it 10,000 years, and it's still not going to find it mathematically. It's just not going to be able to get that right, because the combination of a multilingual phrase plus the numbers instead of the vowels in particular And then you use numbers I just use a combination of techniques. You may find your own way. Try not to use your ID number and stuff like that. Use multiples like 345 or 567. Yes, they can eventually hack it, but they've got to get Granny Loves Purple with those changes as well, right, before they get to your numbers. They're not going to get that right. Doesn't matter how many supercomputers they run. And then you hold the shift in reverse. So you go 345, hold shift, 345 becomes percentage dollar and hashtag. That's in reverse. So it's 543. So you hold shift down. Or do something like that. Figure out a few techniques. So I'm showing you a technique and you're saying, yeah, but everyone's going to know that technique. But remember what I'm telling you here with your password is no one knows the phrase. So if they don't know the phrase, they're never going to go and find where the number is or the letter changes and what numbers you've used. Can you see the logic of it? It's very profound. And it's really fun too, because it's your own password. You know, 6 billion of us in the world plus, and the only person using that password is going to be you. There's not going to be another one using coffee 123, because it's your specific phrase in Swahili mixed with English, whatever you're using. You can see the logic there. Very, very hard to hack that password. Then you do a couple of phrases. You use one that's really difficult to hack for your bank, and you use a number of others for your online identity. So people say use a different password for each system. The answer is, well, if you're going onto suspect zones, then do that. But if you're going to things like Twitter and Facebook, who are very, very, very upset and manage their databases on a very high level, you will probably be safe. But your bank is really important to get the single password with the phrase that no one else uses, and use it just for that, nothing else. So don't use your bank password for anything else. So African experience, I mean, ask talk about the experience in Africa. And this is sensitive because this is China, Africa. And you know, there's a lot of tension in the nation states of the world, America and China, debating with each other. A lot of aggression coming out of this. There's all sorts of hidden agendas going on here. But the African experience involves multiple countries, as we all know. There's a group called the NSO, which is actually an Israeli company, which is working in Africa with governments to monitor people. And there's Australian cyber companies doing that. And there's Chinese cyber companies doing that. And the American Chinese companies doing that. So when I talk about these things, separate the fact that it looks like it's happening with one or two nation states, that it's a target I'm targeting. I don't care about those countries. I'm African, born and raised, thank you. I'm watching them carefully from my position here in South Africa. And I'm identifying a threat to my freedoms based on a relationship that develops between whatever nation state and the application, preferred application. So there's an example in Rwanda and Zambia, where all those Chinese, Israeli, and Australian cyber companies have worked and got involved with monitoring accounts. The most famous one is the WhatsApp account hack committed by the NSO group, who basically admitted it but denied it was for the wrong reasons. There's all sorts of things such as email real-time tracking. So in journalism, what I've found in mentoring newsrooms about this is that a lot of news managers are not instituting this as a policy inside their own organizations because they don't understand it themselves. They don't understand the digital side. And some of them are actually physically and involved directly in semi-abuse structures. They're kind of using it for sexual harassment, some senior managers in journalism and so on. So you can see that there's a lot of to and fro going on here. The big thing that I found is, one, they said slows down reporting. So you've got to log into different Twitter feeds, right? You've got to update the brand's Twitter feed for media site A. So you have this really difficult password that you've got to use to log into it. Once your identity has been set up related to it, who's going to manage that password going forward? It slows down the reporting, we're told. There's the security by obscurity, which I really like that phrase, which I've mentioned already, anonymity. You say, oh, you know, I'm just a sports reporter, so I'm secure because no one cares. That's really dangerous in the modern world. You could say that maybe up to 5 years ago, but in the modern world, that's not a clever way to analyze your risks. There's geographic location. So you say, you know, I'm in a little town far away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Also a mistake, because once you have money in your bank account, even if it's $100, someone wants to steal it from you. And that someone may be living in Odessa in Russia. and you're never going to find them because they're going to take the money and they're going to convert it to Bitcoin. So these are the elements to understand why we're using the password I showed you. Then, of course, there's the ease of use. People get so used to using social media platforms in particular, and also communication mediums such as Slack. Slack has some weaknesses when it comes to access. You can imagine if you're doing really, really secure discussions around something about an investigation that you've done, and you're using Slack, and using Slack for free. The Slack for free's engineers are watching your conversation. They're seeing that. WhatsApp is another example of that. So recent examples are Rwanda and Morocco. NSO Group of Israel built a tool called Pegasus. They monitor calls and messages, general phone use, and can even hack WhatsApp. They claim to have stopped it. How do we know? Because Facebook in the USA took the NSO Group to court about this. So this is how multinational the relationship between our identity digitally and the people who want to abuse that relationship. Huawei, of course, is in the news because the Trump administration's after them all the time. Huawei is developing and has developed surveillance systems in 25 African countries. They're very upfront about this. Why? Because it's government, right? The government is for the people. So I'm not doing anything wrong, says Huawei. They say I'm building a surveillance system. And they're the countries: Tunisia, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria, Zambia, Mozambique, Madagascar, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa. Okay, so they're not little wilting wallflowers about this. Huawei said, so what? It's a legal process. The government approaches us, we build it. So all this debate about, the company called Huawei and the Trump administration and blah, blah, blah. That is for the Americans and Chinese to worry about. Me, as an African, I'm watching. Okay, so there's a company building surveillance networks in Africa. Isn't it the most important fact? I don't care if it's Israeli or Chinese. I really don't. They are helping governments run surveillance systems on citizens. End of story. You can argue about right or wrong, but you cannot argue about it happening. Okay. So if you're a journalist and you go into one of those countries and you're dealing with a situation that's highly sensitive, you've got to start imagining that certain companies of the world that flog this kind of technology are not your friends, right? Because they have a different understanding of the freedom of information. To me, as a South African, particularly, having gone through apartheid, particularly, which used to monitor us as journalists, particularly, and put us in jail. And if you're really unlucky, you'd die. Okay, so you can see my logic here is that I don't trust companies that keep people under surveillance for the good of the nation state, particularly when we have developing nations issues as we have. There's an overlap, for example, with Huawei and 4 and 5G. Now, you've all heard the conspiracy theories about 5G and the virus. That's bollocks, sorry to say. I mean, if you believe that, you need to take those little green pills. But the reality is that there's an overlap between the development of new technology and surveillance technology. So clearly there's an interest by a nation state to do this for whatever reasons. In the case of Zambia, for example, which we're going to get to, it was to assist indirectly in tracking a number of dissidents. The big problem here is that there's no proof that the company itself and the executives are involved, or Beijing, for example, when it comes to Huawei. There's no proof that the executives know about it, nor is there proof that Beijing is behind it. Okay, but there is proof that it's happening. So you can see on the ground the networks of interest, if you like, between the company that's putting in a system, as we'll see with Rwanda, for example, or Uganda rather, $129 million US system. This is not play time. This is big bucks. When you, as a local official, installing that and the government official rocks up to you and says, can you help me track a couple of people? The local official says, yes, sir, because it's $129 million, right? That's a big business decision you've got to make. Doesn't mean that they inform the executives back in Shanghai or Shaanxi or wherever, or Beijing. It just means it's happening, though. So we've got to also see that all this to and fro about can you prove that we know. Let's show what has happened. So in 2019, for example, surveillance systems for monitoring opposition was employed in Uganda. Fact. Go and look at it. Go and see the stories about it. Why? Well, it's to stop abuse of freedoms, supposedly. It's to stop criminals from robbing banks, hopefully. But you can then debate. Well, if that system exists, how can I know it's being used for something that's good, not bad? And who decides what's good and what's not bad? Okay. So Kenya, there's 1,800 HD cameras and 200 HD traffic cameras installed, mainly in the big cities, Nairobi in particular. So that's happened, all right? It's happened. It's not a debate. So because we know that the camera's there, and we know what happened in Hong Kong with the use of cameras. What happened in Hong Kong? The protesters started arming themselves with spray paint, umbrellas, and lasers. What do they do with those three things? They point it at cameras. They point the laser at the camera, which would blind the camera operator and sometimes could even partially damage the camera. They spray paint over the camera lens, so whoever's monitoring, the people in the street wouldn't be able to monitor anymore. And they'd use umbrellas so that the camera can't see who's under the umbrella. Not to mention to allow the tear gas canister to bounce off the umbrella as well. So you can see it's weaponizing. It's weaponizing. Once you start surveillance systems, it's weaponizing our freedoms. And you can be pro-government or anti-government, but you've got to know that it's weaponizing the system. And it's, us as journalists, we're not 5-year-olds. We're not beginners in this game. We identify threats and risks, right? From the start, we identify at the start the risk we have, and we take action based on the risk. So in Zambia, the same thing, 2018, cybersecurity force linked to Huawei was tracking opponents, particularly in Lusaka. Now, Huawei has denied this, but there's proof that it happened. So what's happening on the ground? I mean, who's involved? What about CloudWalk? CloudWalk is actually working in Zimbabwe as one of the main companies to identify African faces, black faces, right, to help the government advance the technology to monitor. And this is a dangerous area we're talking about here, isn't it? And as journalists, we've got to face these things and understand them and say, okay, I'm not going to be freaked out by it. I'm going to just understand the uses. How do I protect myself from it? And why is it a big system? Why is it even a problem? So the various things you can use, such as Secure Drop, which is an internet system that allows journalists to share things. So I'm going to show you a Secure Drop again later. Secure Drop allows people to use something called a Tor browser, which I'm going to show you right at the end. And that means you can encrypt data. So you can share spreadsheets of important information, like which minister got what kind of money, and it's encrypted. The problem for journalists is that when a really oppressive regime gets hold of you and your computer, they torture you and they make you give them your password for the Tor browser. So, and when oppressive regimes see encryption devices on phones and computers, they know you're up to no good in their minds. So what I train people to do is the reverse of that. Do not run these systems. Use other techniques, which we're going to go through quickly. So here's the second wall. There's a list there of 11. I'm going to quickly just go over one or two, but you can read through this in your own time. So this is for newsrooms to take action. So enhance your interest in security. You must make news editors in particular need to train their journalists to understand this. You have to make it a personal thing. They say, oh, I'm anonymous. I'm a little journalist in this little country over here. No one cares about me. That you've got to understand that phishing and so on is a personal attack, which we're going to get to in a sec. That it's about source protection. This is a big thing we drill into each people. You cannot say that, oh, well, I don't care about this. I'm doing my thing. We have a responsibility to our sources who are feeding us information. If they send us something on WhatsApp and someone has hacked WhatsApp, that source is in danger. It's your fault. You can't say, as a thinking journalist, oh, well, it happens to everybody. We have to understand that we're protecting our sources. You adopt secure mannerisms. You're going to be targeted. So one of the things that I've tried to impress on people is you've got to use all kind of old school techniques. You've got to be really, really clever about what you share, especially on social media. You've got to stop sharing real time. The more sensitive information you start trading or running or writing about, the less you talk about where you are. You don't say, I'm going to the restaurant now with my chummies. You say, you use it as a smokescreen. So What we're doing is working with investigative journalists to build an entire system where they're not. And I'll explain by the end of this, you'll see what I mean. So you trick the system to think you are where you're not. And there's some, that's adopting secure mannerisms. You're a champion for improving an individual personal action as a news leader. You get advice from experts. You know, you actually find out about this. It's not like 10 years ago, and I'm afraid a lot of newsrooms are operating like it is 10 years ago. And it's creating big problems. And in the future, it will become more of a problem because of AI and robotics and everything else growing, and CCTV techniques and so on. So you make your personal actions about how journalists should act on workflows. You know, you integrate security into workflows. And you need to empower yourself as a person about what to use in these situations. And it's a new tool. We've got new tools. The social media platforms are new tools. And therefore, we've got to understand security, new tools in security. We can't ignore that and say, oh, well, it's for the IT guru to get to. It's a collective issue for us as journalists because we're sharing information with each other. So how do we not expose each other to advanced dangers or phishing and hacking? And then the big thing that I've done as an investigative journalist over the years is I've always shared intelligence with my competitor because it saves me. You know, when you're doing, I did a story, for example, many years ago involving money laundering, $100 million money laundered through a city here in South Africa. Those people would kill me without blinking. So how did I protect myself? As soon as I broke the story, I shared it with my competitors. Suddenly everyone's got the story. So what? My competitor's running. Who are they going to shoot? So you've got to start thinking about how you work with information and not be tied to this whole old-fashioned concept of, oh, we break the news first and we hold us. No, we break the news, we share the information. And then suddenly there's a whole bunch of people who have it. They can't really attack one or two people. There's whole organizations involved. Then, this is also important, a tier system. Now, I know a lot of organizations, especially news, still give the social media updates to the intern. Big mistake. I mean, the intern's going to make big mistakes. And secondly, you're going to expose the fact that someone's going to hack the intern who's using password 123 or coffee I love or something as a really silly password. And they're going to find it and hack it, and in the next minute, you're going to find these terrible things on your Twitter feed. So you adopt tier systems for each part of the communication that you have as an organization. And then very important, have a lawyer available. So there's some more here about security champions and how to integrate things as a third wall on your accounts, which you can read through in your own time because we're running out of time here. So I'm just going to leap to phishing emails. This is the thing. This is emails I've been getting. I'll give you an example. If you look on the screen, you'll see it says Standard Bank. It's got my name. It's got the logo. But if you look very carefully, the logo is pixelated. If you look carefully, can you see it's not exactly right? So I knew this was phishing. So what I do is I take the email address and I go and I search for it on a URL. I just copy email address, info@standardbank.co.za. Now I put it into my browser, which will check to me how dangerous it is. And look, it says to me, you're about to log into the site. It does not require authentication. It's an attempt to trick you. Your own browser is telling you there's some problems with that email address. Then I went and used something on Macs, which you can use, and you can do this on PCs too. You can view what's called the source. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the source says, it says the return path is info@Standard Bank. You can see in blue there. It's actually not. It's coming from a place called vps.thenewhuman.com. And it's an unknown IP address. So those numbers there, 104.236.54234. You probably can't see it on your small screens, but there's an IP address there. That is an unauthenticated thing. So someone from a big bank is sending me an email from an unauthenticated email address. I don't think so. That's phishing. That's quite clearly phishing. But from the start, I knew it was phishing because the logo was all wrong. But I wanted to show you how you can test it. So if you want to protect yourself, and there's the example that you're going to get in the presentation that you get after this. I explain how you can actually find the source on mail systems, Mac mail systems, for example, and you can do the same on using, you convert the email to HTML. It's just a right-click convert on Outlook. You can see how it works, and then you see source data, and it gives you the return path. The return path is always unless you're a really good hacker, it's quite hard to hack that. So moving from there to VPNs, and I saw from some of the attendees here on the presentation today, the webinar, that you are using VPNs. VPNs are a double-edged sword, like everything. I used VPNs years ago, for example, to start running Netflix in South Africa because we didn't have it here. And now, if you run a VPN of any sort on the computer, on your computer, Netflix will lock your account, okay, in South Africa, because it recognizes you're using a VPN to spoof the server, the Netflix server, to make the Netflix server think that you're in America or Holland or somewhere. So the thing about VPNs is if an oppressive regime gets hold of your laptop and sees a VPN, they're going to regard you as a threat. Why are you using VPNs? How are you going to get around that debate? So you can set it up. It helps in the short term. When someone shuts down your internet system, you can run VPNs to get around that, which happened in elections recently in Africa. And around the world, people are using this technique to bypass local people's attempts to shut you down. The traffic is not hidden, though. Once it hits the public internet, hackers will locate you. And hackers like people who use VPNs. They target you because they think you are borderline legal. So you're going to be in a weak position if they try and locate your bank details or something. So it spoofs servers to make you think you're somewhere else. So you run a VPN to make the server that you're working with think that you're in another country so you can bypass local issues. VPNs are banned in China, for example. They're not legal for the obvious reason. They're banned in Russia. Russia's got one internet supplier. It's called the state. Everything goes through the state's servers. In South Africa, we have 30,000 internet servers. The state is not involved directly with that. In Egypt, there's one, which is the state again. Nigeria, I think, has 8 or 9, but I'm sure whoever's from Nigeria on the call will put me right about that. But there are a number of different entities. But if you're in a nation state that's controlling information, they control access to VPNs, don't they? So there's a limit to how much you can use on this. So I'll give you 2 examples of VPNs. One is based in Panama, one is in Switzerland. One is called Nord, and the other one is called Proton VPN. They both have positives and negatives. The starting price is around $5 a month for that. Why are these 2 based in Panama and Switzerland? They don't have data retention laws. In other words, if you want to sell drugs, you're going to use a VPN. Or if you want to buy something and pretend that you're in America, you can use a VPN. So you can see how it's abused, how the concept of freedom is abused. So when people find you with a VPN, they think one of the 2 things. What are you trying to hide? So hiding in plain sight is what we're getting at here. Don't use material on laptops and on cell phones, which is sensitive when you're involved with highly sensitive investigations or relationships. Move off the computer. Do not use your laptop with a Wi-Fi signal. Take the chip out of the laptop. Get your IT, take it to IT, ask the shop that you take your laptop to take the Wi-Fi chip out of the computer. Once you're not linked to the internet, it's like a notebook. You can store that separately. So because it's easy to do, people do it and then they trap themselves. So yes, VPNs are fantastic to a point. You can see what I'm saying. They're fantastic to a point. But when you're dealing with really, really violent, oppressive regimes, they're not good to have. Okay. So you, in your tiered risk analysis at the start of this, you'll say, I'm using VPNs because I'm not ever going to be reporting from Russia. So they don't care about me. So, and I'm doing just basic stuff on it and I'm paying my $5 and I'm not involved with drug dealing or whatever. And so you can see the tier. You're assessing your risk and you're applying your risk to that. The second thing to do is partition your drives. And I'll give you a long description here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Both Macs and PCs and Linux systems, you can partition drives. What that means is you take the hard drive on your computer and you create a portion of it that cannot be seen and you hide it. The problem is that people who are experts at this will see the size of the hard drive and they will see that a portion of the hard drive is hidden. And then again, they'll say, why have you hidden your hard drive? You can see constantly there's this weaponized fight between taking action to protect myself And then the question is always asked, why? Why did you run a VPN? They say at the border when they've got your laptop. Are you not an ethical person? What have you got to hide? You can see the problem here. It's like having a car with a hidden shelf at the back. If you go through a customs area and they find the hidden shelf, what is this? They immediately think that you're a criminal, right? Or that you're doing no good. So the second thing we can do is we can hide data on computers. You can right-click and you can actually hide the file. But again, people involved in nation states, for them, finding those hidden files is very easy. And then what happens? They ask you for the password and you say no, and then they slap you around. So as soon as you create a situation where things can be found but they're hidden, you are saying to authority figures, okay, I've hidden my data. And they're saying, well, you must be doing wrong. So, but for initial use, so for example, if you're going to the police officer down the road, they're not really up to speed with innovations like this. They're not going to find it, right? They're going to look around your phone and stuff and say, okay, yeah, you can leave. But if you go up to surveillance and intelligence sources and so on, this is the first thing they look for, is things that don't look right on your computer. So you can hide it by encrypting, and I've got a description how to do that. It's really fun to do. So I advise you guys, if you're not encrypting files, to learn how to do it, because it is quite fun. It means that if your computer's stolen and you do have your details of how to log into your bank and you've encrypted the file, most criminals will not be able to get to that file unless they're they're linked to intelligence sources. So you're actually doing yourself a favor by taking some of the information you've got and making sure that no one can just find it and use it once they access it. And I go through both the Macs and PC version how to do it. So, which is 99% of the world. I didn't do Linux because only a handful of people are using that operating system. What I wanted to show you though is deleting your Google, if you haven't done this, web and app activity. And the problem for this is that Google will monitor you even if you don't use Chrome. They'll still monitor you because that's how their service works. Google's very invasive. So one of the problems for people who get involved with, let's just say you're going to go and do an investigative report and you go to Mozambique and you come back and then you go somewhere else and eventually you get caught. The authorities can open up, they can force you eventually through devious mechanisms, as I said, torture et al., to give you so you have to give them a password. They can just look at your computer and say, oh, you were in Mozambique at this precise time, at the precise point. That's what Google does. It tracks you exactly to the place within 5 meters and time. And it puts a little red dot on a map, just in case you kind of forgot you went to America last year. Little red dot, there we were. And it tracks that forever, unless you tell it to stop. So what you can do is you can go to, I'll show you there, myactivity.google.com on your browser. And your activity means you personally. And it'll open this little page. It says web and app. Go to have a look at web and app activity. And then look on the right-hand side there. It says, choose how long to keep your web and app activity. The top one, keep until I delete manually. In other words, never ever delete it. Keep for 18 months or keep for 3 months. I've got mine set on 3 months. And every now and again, I go back to delete manually because I don't like to be tracked by anything or anyone. And I'm sure the same as most of us in this call feel the same way. Imagine if you're going to have a look at myactivity.google.com and it'll track you from the first days you started using a computer. It'll go back 10 years, which is kind of creepy and also wrong. I think it's just wrong that we have our own lives tracked to such an extent. But also as journalists, where you don't want people to know that you were doing an investigation. You can see there how it's important. So you can choose to delete automatically. Notice here, what does Google not give you? It doesn't give you delete all the time every day, does it? It's just not available. So it's keeping my details for a quarter of a year, 3 months, right? And saying, okay, you have to come back here and delete it at some point. If you want to delete yesterday or the day before. But it's going to keep that. It's going to keep that detail even if I don't use Chrome. If I use other browsers, it's still tracking me on my use. So be aware of this if you're involved with like serious investigations and stuff. At some point, someone wants a computer of yours because they're going to find out exactly what you were doing, and not only who you're talking to, but exactly what you were doing and exactly what time of day and when. There's other things that I'm showing people here. It's kind of half funny, but it's true. It's called the suicide machine. And what it does is it gets rid of all your tracks, digital tracks ever, on everything. But be aware that if you've forgotten your password, you're in big trouble because a lot of people don't clear their cache or don't delete their data because they can't remember their passwords. And they rely on the machine to tell you what your password is. We all get ourselves into these cycles. But there is, if you go online, and I've given you this as an app, you can go, and it's called the suicide machine. It's going to take your identity digitally and wipe it completely clean. That's an extreme act, but it's also maybe necessary at times. If you suddenly decide you're going to go and do a story on a nuclear industry in Russia, and you're actually arriving as a tourist, guess what? You're going to delete everything that anyone ever knows about you, and starting with digital, of course. Then what do you do about that? So there's various other ways to clear your identity before you go and do something really serious in investigations. And I hesitate at times to discuss this with people because you can use it in a nefarious way, can't you? Everything I'm showing you here can be used for bad. And that's the difficult part, is that it's a bit like letting the cat out of the bag. If you know that okay, so what follows the fact that I've deleted my identity? What do you think follows? Well, I'll create a whole different identity. Hey, I'll start now. I'll create a whole life. So that's why when you're on Twitter and you see that person says, join July 2020, 5 followers, you're like, and they look between 20 and 30, you know, whoops, something's not right there. That's probably a bot. Okay, so there are various steps to delete your system here. I go through examples too of troll farms, how they work. You can do your own Twitter audit. I've got on the presentation, you can go and audit your own Twitter account. It tells you how many fake followers you've got. I've got 12. My audit score is pretty good. It says 98%. But you'll be amazed, the more important you are, the more fake followers you have, because people are trying to hack you all the time by doing different things. And then there is the anonymous system I was telling you about. I'm going to just get to the end here because we're running out of time. But there's something called Panopticlick, which is a privacy blocker. There's something called PrivacyBadger, which stops trackers. There are all sorts of anti-tracking devices. I've got 2. One's called Ghostery, and of course AdBlock Plus are the 2 things that you can use. But these PrivacyBadger is an escalation of that. It's a really aggressive way to stop people from prying on you, and it tells you when people trying to hack you. It catches people doing it. So that's quite a nice thing to install. Then this is the one that I end with, and I say you've got to use this, please, ethically. You can create an entire identity using this application. Now, if you're involved with oppressive regimes, this drives them nuts because they don't know who you are. But unfortunately, hackers use this too. Can you see how everything we've spoken about has this balance? Now, you don't want to get all religious about it, but you've got to understand that there's a payment to be made if you use a weapon negatively. And a weapon is there for protection, maybe, or it's there to stop an attack, but it's there for a reason. So if you're using identity generators to find out why 10,000 people went missing from Northwest China, or to find out what Republican in America is involved in sexual harassment, you're doing a good thing, I think. But the people involved in those nation states would not agree. So you can see how this, now the word terrorist and all the debates about freedom fighter, one's freedom fighter is another terrorist and all those things, that's exactly what we're doing here digitally. But you can manage your identity out of the present. And I'm finishing now. We're going over the art and science of shutting up. Do not real-time information anymore on social media. Retract that. Stop doing that. If you're part of your job and you're doing an event coverage, that's different. But when you say, I'm going to the movies now, stop doing that kind of stuff. It's like having a screen on the front of your house with a projector, and anyone walking past can see exactly what you're doing. It's not clever. Okay. 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds, when you get adults, you stop doing that. It's not clever to do. Secondly, you can use smoke screens. I'll jump through a couple of these, and I don't necessarily do this publicly. There's only 2 or 3 examples I'm going to give you, but if you'd like to contact me and we talk more confidentially, I'll give you other examples. The one is you create a false credit card trail. So you want to make sure that the government of X or the organization is trying to get a hold of you, or some brutal people are out to get you. You create a credit card trail that says you're in Australia and you're actually in South Africa, but you need certain systems and backing to do that. But that's one trick. The second one is obvious. I have this phone, all right? It tracks me. So if I don't want to be tracked, what do I do with the phone? I leave it here and then I go and visit my source. So someone who may be tracking me thinks I'm still at home. It's very simple. So I don't switch it off. I don't cover it in tinfoil. Because if someone sees me with a tinfoil phone, they go, naughty, naughty, naughty. But if I leave my phone here, I'm anonymous suddenly out there. I use a burner phone. I use a second phone that does not have internet on it. It's just got calls. Yes, you can still track calls, but can you see what I'm saying? So I use the public open persona to obfuscate rather than to using hidden systems like Tor browsers. Then I use very strong passwords to protect. And then I just think about what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis as a journalist. What do I not want to let people know? I did filming in Lesotho. I didn't tweet live from Lesotho for a reason. So you can see what I'm saying to you. When I got home, I then said, I've been to Lesotho for all sorts of reasons. So you hide in plain sight. You use cache, burn a phone without internet, face-to-face meetings, computer without Wi-Fi. Don't use flash drives. Try and avoid using flash drives. How do you think the Iranian centrifuge was blown up by the Israelis and the Americans? The scientists used a laptop that had a flash drive inserted by apparently an escort, and they plugged in their computers into the centrifuge in Iran and it blew up. So, and it's called the Stuxnet virus. It's famous amongst hackers. Use pen and paper. Have a safe zone, a drop zone, like a post office, old-fashioned post office number, post box, which you open with a key. You put your stuff in there. You don't put it online when it's really, really important. Create confusing identities. And in the modern world, it's very easy. Mask, right? COVID, sunglasses. Face recognition systems now have a problem. Okay, unless they can see through the sunglasses, because they work on the distance between your eyes and the shape in particular. So sunglasses, mask, funny hat, walk different. Suddenly the monitoring system thinks you're someone else. You disappear as the monitored person. So you can see that the techniques that we use as journalists and just as thinking people are pretty old-fashioned, even though we're highly skilled at modern digital issues. So I end off with hiding in plain sight, a long list of things that you can look at. So please read through in your own time. We're at 11. I think I should stop at this point and ask for any questions. Okay, I've got a question here. Would you say the US government is correct to oppose Huawei? And is it even possible to do this, especially as Huawei does so much work in Africa? Thanks, Barry. Yeah, brilliant question. No, I don't think it can control Huawei. Huawei controls and is loading in Africa. It's going to be responsible for over 80% of the backbone of 4 and 5G in the future. So how can you say to an international entity of that sort that you're doing wrong and you can't be here? So you can see that there's a tussle going on at a almost Cold War analogy level between the Americans, the Europeans, and the Chinese, because they're two different kinds of systems. So we in Africa are caught between the two. But financially, how can we compete with Huawei? I'm talking to you through my router here. That is Huawei. Okay. So we can't say, oh, well, let's use something else, because something else is more expensive. But you must have, I know that Huawei router that I use here can talk to China. It just can. My Zoom account that I'm using with you here, for example, has, it's the China-Africa Zoom account. Zoom account has a problem. It's got a mathematical problem. In April this year, it was forced to offer encryption. What did they do? What's the fastest thing to do when it comes to mathematics and encryption? You use 6 digits. What does that mean? It means that you can only have 1 million passwords. So if I'm a hacker and I want to hack into Zoom, I run 1 million passwords quickly through an algorithm, hammering on the back end of something. Let's just say the South Africa's parliament, which was hacked, by the way, using a Zoom account. And eventually, the 1 million passwords go through in split seconds. Whack, it finds the password, it logs in. And you see that everything we do here means we have to then tussle. But I have to use Zoom and you have to use Zoom because everyone is using Zoom. So can you see? But there's certain things I will never use Zoom for. Anonymous attendee, should journalists consider to become good at hacking? Is it advisable? Yes. So there's a group called the Hacker Group. Go and belong to it. Hacking's got a bad name as a good name. If you understand what hackers are doing as journalists, I watch bankers closely, financial, mainly because it's run out of London and New York, the world's banking industry. These are not nice guys, all right? I watch them because they do banking. So why am I not watching hackers? Why am I not part of a group to understand what's happening? What do you use it for is another question. So anonymous attendee, great question. Please learn more about how it works. You don't have to then open up Python or Linux or these systems and start typing out everything, but you know the weaknesses that we're discussing here. Secondly, you become good at identifying them. Because if we do 1 or 2 little courses in Python, especially, or Linux, the 2 main things that are used by hackers, there are a couple of others, but those are the big things, you are at an advantage compared to other journalists. But our job is to not become algorithm experts, become experts at doing something about the world, right? So the short answer is yes. Try and understand what's happening there. Even if you don't become a hacker, a competent hacker, that doesn't matter. I'm not a competent hacker. I'm a code writer. I learned Java years ago and a few other things, HTML and CSS and all these things. But I use that to think like a hacker. All right. So I think we should know more about it. Is it really possible to avoid Chinese models? It seems unrealistic. No, it's not possible, as I've explained. We're in a growing nation state. China has indicated that it wants to buy commodities from Africa, and it wants to get closer to African governments, and that's what's happening. So how can you and I as journalists stand up and say it's wrong, unless it's colonialism? And when that happens, when the nation state moves all its workers in to build a building, that's wrong, obviously. And then hides them behind Hessian so you can't see into the building. And then you think, oh, look, wonderful, building being built in Namibia, as I saw recently, in Windhoek by this company. Meanwhile, it's using citizens from another country to build it. That's a bit of a problem. So you can see, is it possible to avoid a model? You know, how far do we want to go where we are managed by a machine? Who gets to manage and own that? So we are tussling with this all the time now. So that's a good question. And my pragmatic answer to you is we cannot avoid it, but we can identify it. So when you stare at a threat straight into its face, it knows that you know. Okay. So that you can make decisions about what is right, what is wrong, and so on. Those people pressurizing us as journalists, especially saying, oh, yes, but it's the Americans who don't like the Chinese, they're racist or whatever. That's true. However, that doesn't really impact my thought about what happens if I go to Zimbabwe and they arrest me using a Huawei server. Can you see? Can you see that existential threat to my life locally? What kind of stories would be most dangerous for African journalists to cover? IS. Okay. You know, there's a group of Russian mercenaries in Africa at the moment, like the Americans and South Africans, all kinds of people, that will not go to northern Mozambique. And they were hired to do some protection of pipelines and stuff there. They're using South Africans instead because they're too afraid of IS. So there are, and this is a group called the Wagner Group, mercenaries. They're Russian soldiers. They will not go to some parts because it's too dangerous. So the most dangerous stories are definitely linked to fundamentalists like IS. No question about it. And we know how dangerous it is. I've had friends killed by fundamentalists, journalists. And we cannot turn our backs on the fact that folks like that, they're not from the kind of area we are thinking about. They're not using the same kind of ethical logic. So those are really, really dangerous, aren't they? Boko Haram, these groups of people. It's very difficult covering stories about that. And Isn't it better to become a recluse and a hermit? So this is the one thing that's come through quite regularly when I do these training sessions and speak to people. I'm trying to convince you that because you're a thinking person, you do not need to be a hermit. We have to use these systems. But it's like a car. You get in the car, put the pedal down, and if you're going at 180 Ks an hour, you're going to die somewhere along the way. So you don't go 180 Ks. You go at the speed limit. The same thing with the digital systems. We have to use servers. What are we not going to do in it? We're not going to say where we are. We're not going to say, I'm going to the restaurant now, because someone's going to mug you down the road because they know you've got a nice car. So you don't let on where you're going to all your 4,000 followers or whatever it is. It's not their business to know where you are right now, I hope. Unless you're an influencer and that's your whole job, and that's a different kettle of fish. So no, don't become a hermit. I'm 58. I've been using technology since the 80s, 1980s, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm aware of it though, and I use it. I use it at its own end. That's why I will leave my phone if I'm doing a sensitive investigation. I will not take it with me. I will take an old-fashioned camera that's got no Wi-Fi in it. And I will leave this somewhere so that just in case someone's tracking me, they think I'm still at home. And meanwhile, I'm 400 kilometers away. Okay. Yes, it's a problem. I can't WhatsApp my friends. But hey, can you see what I'm about analyzing the dangers and the risks and then using the advantages? There are so many more advantages to disadvantages to technology, of course. Look at what it's done for us in the world. Toby has got a question here. Thank you for your comment, Toby. And your question is, but a naive question, is the antivirus in my system really worth a penny? I'm afraid there are a handful that are worth anything. One is Sophos, S-O-P-H-O-S, Sophos. Kaspersky has got issues, I'm sorry to say, and I'm not committing libel here. If you go and figure out what I'm saying to you, Kaspersky's got problems. So some of the antivirus now that are not built into the system, I use a Mac only for a reason. Macs have antiviruses built into their systems. They're still hackable, but it's much more difficult to hack than a PC. I just know that. Yes, they're expensive, but the operating system's much safer. I use one of these. It's a second-hand phone I bought, right? I didn't buy this new. I bought the second-hand. And why do I buy a iOS? Because I know iOS servers, the FBI cannot get my password, right? But if I use Android, it's automatically monitoring what I'm doing, all right? And if I use Huawei and Android, it's automatically monitoring me from another country, okay? So you got to then start dividing your world based on needs. What kind of development of AI means for the future of mankind? Geez, that's a huge question, Anonymous. You know, I've seen a lot of promises made by technology, and most have failed. I mean, for example, where is the auto-driving car? 10 years, about $15 billion, Uber, Google, these guys are spending on this car. Where is it? It's not here. Because there's too many chaos parameters in the real world. Yes, we are going to get a car that will drive itself when most cars are driving themselves, or there's a special road for cars that drive themselves, right? Until then, when the llama jumps out and Google's algorithm says, what is that? It knows about a giraffe, it knows about a lion, it knows about a dog and a pedestrian, but the llama, what is that? Bang, hits the llama. Okay, so you can see. So AI is not the threat that people make it out. Yes, AI is being used by Associated Press. Most of the business stories it writes, the first business story that comes out from, say, a listed company, is using AI, because you don't need to be a journalist to do that kind of stuff. It's, you know, this quarter's results, profit, losses, blah, blah, blah. It's like a spreadsheet. So the AI grabs it and spits out a story that's about 2 paragraphs long, which is generic. Then a journalist looks and says, ooh, okay, the percentage drop is high. And then they focus on the real story, which is why the company lost so much money, not writing like an idiot the numbers. AI will work with sports reporting. You don't want a journalist to sit there typing out 24 sports reports. It makes us nuts. Let AI go and do that. But it gives us time to think about the important things outside of it, what it means. How does it all work? So I'm very hopeful for AI in the long term, given what we've said so far. We're always watching the threat of the machines trying to do things with people who are managing the machines. But remember, every algorithm is written by a human being. That's why there's so many problems with social media, with the fact it's written by Americans who are majority white. Okay, it's a fact. So it's making mistakes. Algorithms make mistakes when it comes to me in Africa and you and me in Africa. So we can play with these things a little bit and not be threatened by them. Be empowered by the knowledge that it's happening. We're identifying it's happening. So what are we going to do about it? Not turn our backs and go and live in a hill somewhere. And then another question from an anonymous attendee: are Africans and African governments oblivious or uncaring about Russian, Chinese, and other people, Americans, Israelis, Australians, and monitoring technology? No, they're doing it cynically. Of course, they're saying, you mean I can read my opponent's WhatsApp messages and I just got to plug this little thing in here? So it's the opposite. It's a cynical action by governments. In the old days, they used to monitor our phone calls. You know, and during apartheid in the 80s, we'd hear strange noises. I was one of the few independent journalists in radio in South Africa, and we could hear when the monitoring machine went on. What we would do in calls, we'd purposefully do calls knowing that the machine was monitoring. So that's anonymous. What I'm saying to you is the governments are there, not for good reasons always, and they're going to do stuff that's bad. You and I know that. So how do we play with the machine? You see, how do we play with the machine? The people who have it have a very strict understanding of what it can do. But we, as independent thinkers, can use that strict control against itself. So if you're interested in taking this further, please contact me afterwards. And we'll have I need to get to know you better. And we need to have a discussion about why you're asking, or individuals may want to do some of these things. And it must be for right, not for wrong. And we can then develop some of the ways in which I've indicated in that you create smoke screens. You don't disappear. If you disappear, the system thinks there's a problem because everyone has social media. So yes, they're not oblivious. They're cynically using the context they're having. You can use greed, you can use power, whatever you want to do as a motivation. They are cynically doing it because they can and because it works. So what do we do about that? You know, what we've always done to cynical, oppressive regimes, we get rid of them over time. And their technology, I'm afraid to say, is in the end their weakness, which I'll explain to individuals who want to continue a conversation in a more confidential way about how we can do this and not be victims. So you can see that it's about empowerment, personal empowerment. The principle is get to know how it works, use it against itself. That's in a nutshell what I try and do with this, with the logic of these things, is do not make the mistake of using a weak password. It starts from there, personally. In news basis, if you're a news manager on this call, try and start thinking about this, because this is not 2002, and I'm afraid a lot of news organizations seem to think it is. It's 2020, going to 2021. We're at an advanced phase of communication growth, the globe. We need to kind of get with it as organizations. So thank you so much. We're over time here. Some really, really good questions there. And please feel free to make contact with me if you have other questions.
Thank you, Desmond. There's one more question under the chat section from Yushan Wu. Can you see that?
I can't. I'm looking at it now. Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Please feel free to, I'm having a look here. I can't see. The last one I have is 1108.
Okay. Let me just read it for you. It's from Ishin Wu, and she's asking, how can journalists protect themselves from corporate and state surveillance? Are there laws in South Africa for this? What steps would you suggest be taken if accounts such as official Twitter handles are hacked? I have heard of journalists who suspect authorities have gone through their laptops. Can you tell if their device has been hacked?
Yes, you can. You need to get it to an IT expert who can help you with that. If you contact me afterwards, I can advise you. But the big thing is that the most most of the time we know we've been hacked because people use it nefariously. I spent a year in South Africa's government, by the way. I was hired as an advisor in 2017, 2018. I was in the communications section. I was a chief director. And I had a situation that developed where a deputy minister somehow got hold of a Twitter password. I had to personally challenge the head of communication to their face to make them stop doing it. So this is inside government, right? So this is not just journalists being hacked. This was one of the Twitter feeds that was used by GCIS, where I was the chief director in one of the departments. And the ministers had hacked that account for the use of the political own use. So I had to go personally to the head of communication, her communication, and say, stop, because you're destroying my strategy about communicating government's plans on Twitter. That what they were doing is they were dropping 5 or 6 or 7 comments. You know the big mistake people make who are amateurs? They dropped 5 comments on Twitter. Bang, 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 bang. And you go, what? Any user gets so upset with that. So I had to go and say, stop doing this because it's destroying my team's strategy. You know, we tweet when it's important. We don't just drop tweets. So that's a long answer, but you can see what I'm saying to you. That's the way I normally guess that someone's got involved with a feed that they shouldn't. They start fiddling with it. If you don't know that, there are other ways in which we can tell if they've run a system software on your laptop, on your own personal laptop. There is a way we can do that. If it's not on your own personal laptop, it's quite difficult because it involves the telcos, the telephone companies. And governments by law have a right to go to a telephone company with an affidavit and a magistrate's command, at least saying that they need to assess someone's phone for whatever the reason, they're bank robbers or whatever. So that's the answer. Yes, we are protected in South Africa. As journalists, we may not have our personal accounts hacked of that type unless it's because we were doing wrong. To try and debate that, however, is quite difficult with power networks. But you can get hold of Dario Milo in South Africa. He's a really, really good communications and human rights lawyer, and he loves these kind of things. If he spots that you've been hacked and someone is nefariously using it from the state, he's going to get you some money. So he's a good place to go in terms of the kind of lawyers that exist out there that are stopping the abuses that the state may try and commit against us here in South Africa. But it's very different around different countries in Africa. Okay. Thanks. That's a good question. And we have the PAPI, of course, the Protection of Information Act that's supposed to do that, but that's been tweaked a bit under the guise of COVID-19. Our government is tweaking it to try and sneak in a few extra things about what the state can do to you and me. It's a classic case, isn't it? I mean, it's the weaponized thing going on between the freedom of speech and the attempt to stop the freedom of speech. And the people in power, a lot of the time, have an interest in stopping the freedom of speech. And our job is the watchdog of power. Mm.
Okay, thank you very much, Desmond. I think we've had very interesting questions. People are very interested in this topic, and I'm sure everyone has learned so much. I know I have learned a whole lot of new tools that will be useful. And I think this comes at a very crucial time where everyone is working from home under the lockdown regulations of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are very essential tools for us to use to protect ourselves and to protect our digital footprints. So I'm very, very happy that we were able to have this webinar. Thank you so much for your contribution. We will be sharing your presentation to the participants, and we'll be sharing it on our website. Thank you everyone who has joined us today, everyone who is watching us live as well. So on that note, everyone keep safe and well, hopefully from the pandemic. And thank you again. Thank you very much, Desmond. This was very useful, and it will be something that I'm sure these journalists will keep on referring to, because there's a whole lot of tools that they're going to go back to utilize when they're going on to the field and when they're working on their personal gadgets. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to close off, that if you want to keep up with our upcoming webinars, please go visit our website and also our social platforms. We will be having 7 more webinars for the rest of the year. So to participate, just make sure to look in to visit our website so you can register for those. Thank you once again, and have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.